All right, we'll get started here in a couple minutes. For those that are watching live, please feel free to go ahead and introduce yourselves. If you have questions, we've had a number of people that had sent questions in advance. So we'll go through those as well as any questions that people have as we're kind of going through stuff here. And it sounds like the audio is working okay. I'm going to change the volume on my monitoring computer. We'll just have some more people kind of coming online as we speak. Um, so if, for those who are watching it offline, we could just we'll get started usually about 5 or 10 minutes in after we collect all the questions. So if you wanted to go ahead and just kind of bounce forward, we could do that. Also, so we'll just kind of let the questions come in. And so we see Diane from Missouri. Scott, good to see you. From Edison, New Jersey. Joey had some questions. We'll have some more people logging in here. All right. So, and again, if you have questions or topics you wanted to see covered tonight, we have a number of questions again sent in advance, and you could always send them in by subscribing to the Club Cubase YouTube channel if you wanted to do that. Hi, Pete. Good to have you online. All right. So once again, if you have questions, please feel free to go ahead and ask. We'll go ahead and just make sure you guys can hear me okay. I'm just going to play a little bit of MIDI information from the computer here. So that's some really bad 80s synth pop. All right. So there's usually just a little bit of a delay as we're kind of going on. So let me know if you guys can hear okay. Let me just make sure. All right, so just let me know if you guys are hearing. I see one comment. So once again, there's a bit of a latency, sometimes about 30 seconds from so there's usually about 30 seconds of delay from when I talk to when you guys hear it. So if it seems a little okay, so seeing people that are hearing it okay. So I think okay. Okay, so please, if you want to ask topics in the actual comments field of any topics you want covered, as I mentioned earlier, we have people that had sent some questions in, so we'll be happy to kind of go through those. All right, we have good Pennsylvania contingent. We have Harrisburg and Pittsburgh. All right, someone from Alberta, great. Okay. All right. So good to see everyone logging in. And just out of curiosity, how many people is this their first time doing the Google Hangout? If you just want to kind of mention the comments field. All right, so you see Ace from Texas. What part of Texas are you in, Ace? I'll be traveling in Texas this month, so I'm going to be doing some clinics in Dallas, Austin, and Houston in a couple weeks. right, so wait just a couple more minutes, get some people logged in. Some more people are logging in. Great that Diane can hear us now. That's always helpful for these things. You don't have to kind of watch it after. Okay, well, good to see some first-time people, and we do this every month, and we also have a number of these online. Okay, so we see. Okay, so it's good. I'm seeing some new people logging in. That's great. And once again, just in the comments field, anything that you want covered, any topics is like, oh, I want to learn how to do this better, I want to figure this out, or this isn't working, please feel free to go ahead and ask, and we'll get started here in just a couple minutes. Okay, so we have more people logging in. Okay, so more people are getting logged in. All right, so Peter from Portland, Maine. I haven't been up to Portland in a while, but beautiful city. I had to go help a Peter Frampton concert there a number of years ago, so had a really good time. All right, so we have a couple more people logging in. And once again, if you for those people that are logged in, please go ahead and if you have particular questions you want covered, we'll get started here in about 2 minutes. Please feel free to ask. Okay, seeing some questions. Okay, so we'll do some drum loop. We just got a question on that. I'm gonna just write that down. Hang on. Okay, so let's see the question about the drum loop. It's Rick DePofi. All right. Good to see you, Rick. Rick, is your studio all moved to New York? That's the big question. So I'll be coming up Thursday doing the Club Cubase in New York City. If you're around, Rick, you want to come in? Rick won 3 Grammys for this past year for his work on the Roseanne Cash record, which is really phenomenal records. If you guys haven't listened to that, you can listen to Rick's work on that. Just a really great record. So great to have Rick join us. All right, we'll wait just another minute or so and get started. Okay, we'll see if more questions are coming in, and then we'll get started here with some more people logging in. And as we're kind of going through this, there is a bit of a delay. So when you hear me talk, it could be 15, 30 seconds until it's actually from when I say it to when you guys hear it. So if you don't hear, if you have questions as we're going along, just kind of enter comments, questions in the field and in the comments field, and we'll try to go through and circle back and get all of the topics. But if there's something that you don't get or anything like that, just kind of entered in the comments field. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started now. One of the questions that we had from someone who was watching the last Google Hangout was how to record tempo changes. If there was a way using kind of like keyboard shortcuts or using like a knob to be able to control that. And I think perhaps in earlier versions there was a way to do that through kind of a generic remote. But I think that may have been removed for some reason. I'm not sure. But one of the things that you could do if you wanted to record tempo information, and also before we get started, if anyone wants to kind of make a little list of topics as we're going through this, like a just like a little index, that'd be greatly appreciated. I know we have some users that have done that in the past for people watching afterwards. So if anyone wants to take notes of the meeting, we can and post that. That'd be great. But let's go ahead and open up a tempo track. Now, one of the things that we realize that when we want to work with tempo in Cubase is we can come directly here, and there's kind of two different modes for the tempo, and that's activated on the transport bar itself. So when I go to my tempo here, if I wanted to just change the tempo, I could just kind of put in a static tempo value here. So if I take my tempo off, it'll default to be 120 beats a minute, and sometimes people come here and try to change the tempo and they go, oh, it doesn't change, and we have a lot of songs producing Cubase at 120 beats per minute. But if you just take this tempo off, and what this button actually allows you to do is to tell Cubase whether it's going to follow the tempo track or not. So if I just want to kind of set a static tempo value here, I could just kind of change this in, and just kind of using my mouse scroll wheel, you can change the values here. Or you could just kind of type in, so you say, okay, I want it to be 120. And that's all fine until you want to have perhaps a tempo change. And then if you wanted it to follow tempo changes, you would need to activate the tempo box directly here. So now if I wanted to see my tempo track, we could actually add a tempo track directly here on our arranger page on our project window. So if I come here, we're just going to add our tempo track. And then as we come here, we can now just kind of enter in different tempos as we speak. So if I wanted to draw in tempos, now that the tempo track is activated, I can have different tempo changes here. So now if I wanted to just have that and change the tempo there. Now there's kind of two different modes. You may notice that as I enter in a tempo value, let's say if I put in a value here towards the end of this piece, I could just say, okay, let's just put in our tempo value here. And we may notice that it's kind of a very abrupt change, and that's because we have it into jump mode. But if I put this into ramp mode, at this point I could just say, okay, I want it to ramp down between these two different events. So you could actually put it into ramp mode, and then once you're in ramp mode, at that point you could just have this automatically kind of scale down. Now the original question was, how do we actually record different tempo changes? So let's say if I just undo these, you'll actually see this little slider here, and you could just move this with your mouse if you wanted to. So once you have kind of the tempo track, we can now just come right here, and you could also just use the scroll wheel if you wanted to kind of do tempo changes here. Now if you wanted to do like finer values, just hold down the shift key, and then you could just do fine values. But now if you wanted to, you could just kind of record your different tempo changes right here, and that way it'll just automatically play back. So again, to go into the tempo editor, if you have it on the main project window here, you could actually just click on the edit button, which is kind of a familiar Cubase paradigm, and that would allow you to open up the tempo editor where you can see this little record tempo slider. Unfortunately, I haven't gotten a way to have this work with a slider, but it's pretty comfortable using kind of your mouse scroll wheel. So I think once you kind of work with that, it'll make a lot of sense. So All right. So that's our question on tempo. Now we had a question just asked about kind of working with drum loops and being able to slice drum loops effectively. So there's a number of ways of doing that. One of them is a really clever way of using the groove agent. So I'm going to just open up a quick project here. All right, so going back to our tempo, we had a question on can you change the tempo of one track only, not affecting the other tracks? What you could do is if you have, I'll just go back to this particular topic here. So when I have this project open, we have different ways that the tracks can actually follow time. So I could have this be in a musical mode, which is based on following the tempo changes, or I could have it based on the position, and that's called linear mode. And we can actually kind of toggle the time base here. So if I have a track selected, I could have this track maintain perfectly, at the times, whereas if I change my tempo, that the tempo won't affect the value of these. So if I wanted one track to not follow or to be independent, you could just set these in your time linear or time musical categories here. All right, so I hope that kind of makes sense. But you could do that. Now, something else that you could do with the tempo track is, one other thing that's kind of neat is the ability to actually have different track versions. So let's say if I wanted to try out different tempo ideas, and I go, oh, okay, I like this tempo. I love that. But now if I just kind of go here to my project menu, and this is introducing Cubase 7.5, we could just say, okay, we want to do a new version. I could just have a completely different tempo track here, and then I could just kind of toggle back and forth between these different track versions. So at this point I could just say, okay, let's look at version 1 tempo track, let's look at version 2 tempo track. You could also just, and you could use keyboard shortcuts for this, but you could say let's do a new track version, and at this point let's say, okay, I want this to we'll ramp, and let's say we'll do a retard here. So we could just kind of have these different tempo tracks. So if you want to audition different tempo tracks and use different parts of different tempo tracks, you could have different track versions for that. So all right. So I hope that makes sense. A little clarification on that. Okay, so we had the question about using the drum loop. So let me just kind of slice up a particular drum loop here. Let me see if I have the right project. Okay, so if I have a drum loop, one of the cool things that you have inside of Cubase with every version is Groove Agent SE. Not only is this just a great drum machine, but what's really kind of cool about it is the ability to have just a lot of utilities. So if I have a drum loop here, let's say if I take a kind of generic sounding drum loop like this, what I could do is just come directly here, and I have my instrument pads, and I could just drag that loop. So you could drag and drop audio to and from the project window or media bay into Groove Agent. So now I could just trigger this drum loop here. So now if I wanted to do slicing, we actually see a slice tab. So once I click on this slice tab, I can say create slices. And what this has done is it's automatically kind of found the rhythmically significant points by transient grid or transient plus grid, or you could manually put in the slices. But what this has done automatically in this loop is taken each of the slices, each of the different elements, and broken it down. And at this point, it's assigned those to each of their own drum pads. Now, it's also created a pattern. So if I wanted to actually just kind of play back this pattern, and this pattern is in essence just MIDI notes that are that drum loop. And we have the ability to now just take that pattern and drag and drop directly onto our timeline as well. So if we wanted to look at this particular file, I could say, okay, let's just take this drum loop here. And what this is going to do is actually just trigger the individual slices here, and it's created a MIDI file. So, and it's going to be kind of laid out chromatically for you. So now when I play, I could assign this. Let me just assign this. I just copied it to the wrong pad. So I'll just do this process one more time. So we'll drag onto our instrument. So once again, just to reiterate, drag it onto instrument, slice, take the pattern that's been created. So we're going to click on create slices. We have our pattern. Now this pattern could be just dragged and dropped directly onto the timeline. So I'll just solo this track here. Sorry about that. All right, so what this is, and some people go, okay, that sounds kind of exactly the same as it did when we started the process. So what was the point? But now, since it's in the MIDI domain, we could actually come right here and just copy that, and I could just kind of shift MIDI notes around. So at this point, I could just say, okay, let's take that, and very scientifically, of course. And I could just have variations if I wanted to have this just reverse the pattern. So if you want to literally flip the beat around. So we can have our original pattern here. Flipped around and back to the original pattern. So, so this in essence, I see a comment from Joey. Is it, you know, is it kind of like a Rex file? Yeah. So it's kind of basically treating it into the same functionality as you would with a Rex file. But again, you don't have to have another program to do it, and it's just kind of drag and drop. And you also have the ability of just dragging Rex files, and each of the slices for the Rex files are automatically just mapped directly across the pads, and you could adjust that if need to as well. So this is like a really, really handy way of doing that. Now, in the full version, so the Groove Agent SE comes with Cubase, but there's some cool little differences that you could do if you have the full version of Groove Agent. I'll just show that, especially in this regard. So the full version, if you have Groove Agent 4.2, which is just a phenomenal drumming tool. So we'll just open this up and we'll just do the same procedure. And there's a couple things that are slightly different in this regard to Groove Agent 4 with Groove Agent that makes it pretty cool. So we'll say if we do this, I could now, we'll just kind of drag and drop directly onto, so we have our audio loop, and we go to edit and we'll slice. So now we could actually have a different mode here. So let's say, you know, if we have different drum sounds, hi-hat, snare, hi-hat, kick, and hi-hat. We could actually now classify these. And what it's done is it's automatically colorized in the full version of Groove Agent, where now we could actually just take this directly here, and now you can see all my snares are one color, the hi-hats are a different color. And if we go to the pattern, we can now actually see the pattern editor. So if I wanted to say, let's make every snare, I could right click and I'll say set notes to the same class. So I can say, let's set all the different snare drums to D1. Now, as I do this, I could also just browse through any of my sounds. So if I wanted to take like a snare sound from anywhere else, I can now kind of play this pattern back. And if I wanted to just tune or just, literally go through and, find any snare drum that I want, I could just go through my browser here and say, okay, let's go through my Groove Agent 4.2. So I could, scroll through any of my samples and just replace by dragging and dropping directly onto pads as well. So this way you could actually find kind of common sounds, and then at that point, you could replace just the snares. And once you've kind of done this as well, you also have some flexibility with the instrument. So you can say, okay, I want to take this kick here, and then I wanted to adjust the pitch just on that actual tune. So, and let's say this one I want to be tuned low. So now when I play the pattern, I could just so you could have a lot of different flexibility with filters and stuff like that. So you could see that the Groove Agent, the full version of Groove Agent has some kind of augmented functionality with that, but you can still do a tremendous amount with what comes stock with Cubase as well. So let's see. Yeah, and another thing you could do is also just kind of find hit points from the sample editor here, and then just kind of drag and drop. So once you kind of adjust your hit points here, and then you can drag and drop, as one of the comments from had indicated as well. So, all right. So let me just kind of go back and see if there's any comments that I missed. All right. Okay, so let me just kind of go back to some comments. All right, so see kind of the group editing. So I'll come back to that. Let me just write that in my notes. All right, so let's go back and take a look some of our questions. So I had a question emailed to me about like how to easily render click tracks. So one of the things that I actually did, and I'm happy to, if you guys wanted to email me, I'm happy to kind of send this particular file to you, and you can email me at Giondo, kind of like condo, but starting with the letter G, like my name, Greg Ondo, ONDO at Yamaha.com. But one of the things I just made, I would see this a lot, was just set up a new project, was a way that people could easily kind of create click tracks that they need to render, and this is one area that maybe the program could do, that hasn't gotten the highest attention. So I just actually went through and made a preset, and I did it within Groove Agent 4 here. So I'll just say, okay, let's create this. And I'm just going to load up. I think I did it on this one. And I made a preset. Let me see if I have it on here. Called click tracks. And what this is a very simple idea. I actually just recorded the Cubase click. So if we come here, so we probably all heard this sound a lot. And one of the things is I would have composers often tell me that, you know, like if they're doing something in 12/8 that maybe they want to see, they wanted to have different subdivisions for different tempos and stuff like that. So I said, okay, what I want to do is to actually come here and have different patterns. And I created different patterns for different time signatures. So if I come here, I could say, I could have a 4/4 pattern or cut time, different eighth note pulses, and 2/4, 3/4, and with like 5/8, I have different subdivisions. So, you know, once you start getting into 6/4 and, you know, like with 12/8, and these are all kind of colorized, so we could say. So maybe at a certain tempo, you may want that to be your click. Now, once we have this done, you could actually just kind of drag and drop these patterns directly into your timeline. And at this point, you can now just, you know, if you wanted to copy that, and you could also just say, okay, once you have like your 4/4 click track, so you can see my click track is turned off. And now if I wanted to render that as audio, all you had to do again is kind of, if I wanted to just select the track here, right click and just choose render in place. Now since I have the track selected, I could actually just have it automatically replace the events and just kind of turn my MIDI track directly into audio. So this way, and I'm happy to share this preset with any of you guys. If you needed to render kind of like the Cubase click track and you don't want to always load up different samples, you could just kind of use this as a preset. And I've also sent it to the people that do some of the sound content, so hopefully they'll include this in. But if you want that this file, I'm happy to share it with you. You could email me at giondo at Steinberg or giondo at yamaha.com. So yeah, I see a comment of, you know, not sure anyone from Rick how it could play to an inspired Pong sound. So, but one of the things is the click track is kind of you know, you can hear it cut through the mix pretty well. Now, we could also use like different patterns, different MIDI patterns for clicks. And if you wanted to get really interesting, if you hold down Control and double click, you could actually go to the click track here and you could route it to any MIDI device if you wanted to. But you could actually load up your own sound. So you could load up any standard WAV file. So if you wanted to use other click track sounds, you could do that very easily. So. All right, so I'm just going to circle back. Let me just read through some of the comments here. Okay, so we had people who wanted to see kind of the going back to like the hit point sample editor way of doing it. So we'll show you that as well. Let me just close this file. Okay, and this is kind of working with the drum loops. So let me just open up that project real quick. I'm just going to revert it to the original state. All right, so if we want to take our drum loop here, and let's say we just have our threshold set there, and we'll just open up, let's say, a blank instance of Groove Agent here. And when we drag this, if you see like a little line, that often means that you have it set to the pattern pads as opposed to the instrument pads. So, I haven't done this before, but I think, with the Groove Agent 1, it would work that way. But I think the Groove Agent SE, as we see here, I think you still would need to slice it manually here. I could be mistaken, and someone else indicated that they kind of do it like that. I could check on the insert presets key command. Let me just take a quick look for the key command. I'm seeing a comment from Joey here. I don't have any real time. I don't have any I'm seeing, could we go over the external rendering with the external effects? I don't have any kind of connected currently. So I can't really, I'm not really set up to show that, but I could maybe have something set up for next time. So my PC, I see I have a question on that. How much RAM do I have in my PC? I'm running 16 gigs of RAM on mine. Okay, so let me just circle back through some of the questions that are coming in. Yep, a lot of people use a cowbell for some of the comments for their click track sound. So let me just... All right, so let me just come back. Yeah, I think the external effects was added in at one of the maintenance releases to Joey. So I'm just circling back through comments here. So I see questions about if I use the click in free space to navigate, you can get the click to locate to a grid. So let me see if I have that. I think that's set up from Dennis. We have preferences there. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Just see if I can find this preference for click in free space. If you know where the So with Dennis, if you know where that preference is, I don't want to sit here and search for the preference in front of everyone. But what you might want to do is when you let me just see if I can, maybe it's under the transport. Let me take a quick look there. Okay, so here's this preference. Locate when clicked in empty space. So you wanted to, question is there a way, if you're using the click in free space to navigate, to get the click to locate to the grid? All right, so I'll go ahead. I haven't tried this yet, but so I believe if you have the snap turned on here, so if you click on J, so if I click here in the middle between the bars and I have my grid set to bar, I thought it just did it. It might. All right, so. Yeah, I don't know of a way. I thought that maybe having this snap turned on, it seemed like it did it the very first time. Uh, Let me just turn snap on. Yeah, so you might have to have that preference toggled off. I could play around with that a little bit more. All right. So let's go through some of our questions that are coming in. Okay, we have a question about Windows 10 update effectus users. I haven't done any testing on it yet, but I haven't seen any kind of nightmarish email saying this is going to be a problem like we do with some other operating systems. So I guess, maybe I think it's going to be out, July 29th. Generally, the Windows updates have been pretty innocuous compared to some of the other platforms. So I'm not anticipating a huge problem with that, but I haven't checked with our developers, which I can. I'm sure they have developer versions. Okay, so we'll go over some logical editor stuff. So let me go back to some of the questions that were sent in. All right, so we had a question about moving MIDI events to a particular start of a note. There's some really handy tricks that you could do with that. So let me just show you one little thing. Let me just find a project that has some MIDI data in it here. So say we'll jump here. So let's say if we're in a part and we want all these events to snap to where this note is. So you could actually kind of snap your events here. And if you wanted to select all these different notes, one of the things you could do is just right click and you'll see a move to cursor option. So that way you could actually take your selected notes and kind of move them to the cursor. I had it working earlier. Now it's not going to do it for me. Let me try another part. I'll just draw in a part here. Just quickly add a MIDI track. So that way you could actually kind of move like those notes and kind of keep the proportionality of it. But if you wanted to just kind of choose move to cursor, so when you just kind of right click in the extended timeline, you have that option for moving to cursor. All right, now we had a couple questions on someone wanted to do like an easy way of transposing within, like, let's say the MIDI key editor here. So when we look at this, there's a couple different ways to transpose. You could actually just simply tell Cubase to, to transpose if you wanted to come here, if I wanted to move these up an octave. Now, one of the things that I do a lot is, when I'm doing a lot of MIDI arranging, is to actually, I may double stuff and drop it down an octave or drop it up an octave. So one of the tricks to doing this is, you could just kind of come here. If you select the info line and go to your pitch, you could just simply adjust there. Now you could also, under MIDI, go to transpose. So if we just under your MIDI editor, You could go to your transposition setup and you could just have this set, and this value will stick, and you could have it set for an octave, and just like that. Now, one thing that you can also do is just using the arrow keys, like the up-down arrow keys, is transpose like that. But if you hold down the shift key while using the up-down arrows, you could just transpose by octaves. So it's a great keyboard shortcut for that. So that can come in really handy. Now, we had a question that was emailed earlier by Ace Amadeus about kind of setting up like orchestrations and how to get that sense of depth. Like, okay, you know, the winds are behind this level of strings and the brass is behind. So one of the tricks that you could do with that is kind of some of the, you know, obviously levels can work with that, and a lot of sample libraries will kind of take sample or kind of the orchestral position into effect. But when you actually work with some of the reverbs, you can get, you know, one of the tips that I would pass on, I see a lot of my kind of orchestration friends do. So we're going to add an effects channel here. We could say, let's have our reverb. Let's say we'll just open up Revelation, or we'll do Reverence here if we're doing kind of orchestral stuff. But sometimes, so we'll look at this, and sometimes kind of playing with some of the different settings, and I'll just add another effects channel track. So when we come here, we'll go to Revelation. So often, like tracks that you want a little further back, you want to often kind of increase the pre-delay. So when you actually kind of see, and also kind of, you know, work with and kind of increase the early reflections. So those will often kind of give you that sense of depth if everything is kind of sampled from like the same like perspective of depth. So the instruments that you want farther back, try increasing your pre-delay and your early reflections, and that will kind of give it the sense of a little more depth with that. I don't really, unfortunately, have kind of an appropriate file to kind of do that with, but I think if you kind of play, you know, so the instruments you want farther back, a slightly more pre-delay, you know, a little more early reflections, and obviously panning can, you know, and it doesn't have to be like super hard pan, but like, you know, go between, you know, 0 and 50%, but the panning can make kind of a big difference with those settings as well. So that some of those things will make kind of a big difference with that. So experiment with some of your reverb settings. But that should be able to kind of really help you with that. All right. So I'm seeing questions about a Tascam 2488. Let me just, I'll just Google it real quick here and see if I could take a look at it. I'm not sure if that works as a sound card. Give me 1 second. Just kind of looking at the Tascam website. I'm not sure if that is to be designed as a audio interface as well as just kind of a standalone recorder. Let me just take a quick look here. Hang on. Yeah, it kind of looks like the 2488, and I just kind of glancing at it, but it doesn't look like it's an audio interface. It looks more like it's a standalone recorder, so you might have to kind of get an actual audio interface. I could be mistaken. I'm not that familiar with it. So I was seeing a question on why does Windows have to have the arrow theme for Cubase to work. I think it's how some of the new graphics engine was built to kind of take advantage of that. So I think that's kind of why you need to be using the arrow engine. So let me just circle back through some other questions here. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the logical editor presets. And the logical editor sometimes can be a little tricky to get your head around initially, and it's also kind of like one of those things that can really get you out of trouble. Now, the logical editor, when we kind of open it up, it can look a little daunting, and you can say, okay, what is this actually doing? We could think of the logical editor as a conditional editor. So any type of Boolean condition that we could possibly think of. Now, I was a little intimidated by, like, when I first started running Cubase 24 years ago or whatever. But I was doing a project where it was a very small project studio, and we're doing electronic drums for the drums, but real cymbals, because at that time all the cymbal samples were really poor and just, really, super short and didn't sound good. So it's kind of a rock band, and we realized that after, when we're editing all of the MIDI drums, that every time that the drummer went to the ride cymbal, that it was actually triggering the tom pad below it. So every time it went to the acoustic ride, it would send kind of a false trigger to the snare, and we didn't catch it kind of as we're tracking. So we, and it was about 45 minutes of MIDI drums. So instead of going through and looking at every note that had a velocity of kind of a lower velocity on that pitch, I set up a logical editor preset to do this. So I said, okay, I wanted to delete, and this may make sense after we kind of go through this. So you have different functions here. You can choose, I want to delete events, and we're going to say that our, let's say we'll come right over here. So we'll say the type is equal to so the type is going to be equal to note, and then we can click here, and we want it to say value 1 of the MIDI is going to be the pitch. So he said, I think in this case it was going to be A1. So we said, okay, we're going to have, so what we're setting up here is delete every note is A1, but let's set a condition where value 2, which is the velocity, is going to be, and we can choose equal, unequal, bigger or equal or less than, let's say 50. 49, we'll say. So what this condition set up is to delete every single note of A1 that has a velocity less than 50. Now you could also do stuff like, okay, I want to transform, or I want to insert. I want to quantize controller data. I want to take every note and be able to, decrease velocity by 10%, or decrease note velocities, or randomize. So you could also just kind of come over here and you want to, randomize or extract different information. Now, the same type of logic can also be applied to the input transformer of a MIDI track. So you may see this little squiggly line here. And what the input transformer allows you to do is to actually set up different MIDI conditions. Now we see this a lot with perhaps like different MIDI drum kits, where you could actually say, okay, I want, you know, this particular controller to only play these particular notes. So at this point you could actually, and you know, one of the great things is there's different presets to kind of choose from. So if you could actually just come over here and say, okay, you know, I want this to pass only on MIDI channel 2, because as Cubase sees incoming MIDI information, it sees it on all MIDI channels, and that's how MIDI is actually kind of designed. But if you wanted only the controller transmitting on MIDI channel 2 to pass to that particular channel, you could do that. So that way you could have like 4 or 5 people playing simultaneously, and then only going to designated or particular tracks based on the MIDI channel. So we could think of the logical editor as kind of a you know, a conditional based editor. You know, I want to quantize, you know, these notes, or randomize these notes around beat 2, or don't quantize you know, beats 1 and 3, but quantize other beats. So any type of MIDI condition that you want to set up in a Boolean system, you could use the logical editor to do stuff like that pretty easily. And a great way to start is just really to you know, take a look at some of the different presets, and from there be able to, you know, take a look at some of the stuff that you could do. So, you know, if you wanted to say, you know, I want to delete muted notes, I want to delete short notes, double the tempo, I want to fix the velocity. So, you know, stuff like that you could do. But again, a very powerful conditional based editor for kind of solving a lot of different things. We used to have a lot of people, I think when the D50 was a popular studio controller as a MIDI keyboard, people would often spit out a lot of aftertouch. I believe that was the keyboard that would do it, and would clog people's MIDI data streams. So we could actually have the input transformer kind of automatically filter out the aftertouch messages coming in, or just simply delete all the aftertouch, or delete all these messages, or turn you know, my modulation into volume controller information, stuff like that. So all sorts of cool stuff that you could do with that. So, and we could spend some more time on that, but if you have like specific conditions, you know, we can, you know, if you want to send in a condition for the logical editor, we'd be happy to kind of go through that and kind of create a condition. So I see a question in Hallian Sonic if we could do, I think someone may, about setting up the flex phraser using an automation track. So I haven't tried that, so let's go ahead and give it a shot. I haven't worked with the flex phraser in a little bit. Okay, so let me just all right, so now we have this open. Let's take a look at some of the automation parameters here. I don't see the flex phraser kind of as an automation parameter, but let me just try to just automate the turning on the the flex razor and see if this will show up. I'll just sell this track, so we're gonna. All right, and let's see if this is an automatable. Yeah, I don't think that is automatable. I could play around with it some more, but I don't think it's set up to do that, unfortunately. But you could just simply, kind of do with, you could kind of experiment around a little bit. But I'll play with it and see if I come up with something. So we'll do that. All right. So how do you create your own expression maps? So the expression maps, you can actually just kind of come directly here if you wanted to. And if you haven't kind of played around with the expression maps, these come in like super handy for doing a lot of orchestration. And there's actually a number, for a lot of different libraries, there's tons of capabilities for doing different expression maps that are available on the Steinberg website. So if you go to downloads under content, we have a guy that runs one of our Club Cubase chapters, Scott Paul Lewis, who's just is great at making expression maps. So he's made tons of them. He has most of the sample libraries. So if you're not familiar with the expression maps, if you wanted to come here, and a lot of times the different string libraries and orchestral libraries will have different key switches. So when we work with the key switches, often what happens, and I see other companies trying to make this kind of a some form of a standard, but often you have a key switch that will actually just switch. So you could actually just kind of use a note to switch between different articulations. So if I wanted to listen to I could have this set to legato now, and if I wanted to switch like this upcoming phrase to, let's say, spiccato, just to kind of change it. So this will just give a little background on what the key switches are doing. And let's say I want that to go back to legato right here. Let me just turn off my snap. And then you could do really annoying stuff like, let's say if I come here, I just want to take these notes and make them pizzicato. Kind of just like this. So now to create your own expression maps, you could actually just go to the Midi menu, and then you could see your expression map set up. So here you're able to, define for the particular instrument. So let's say if I go to violin 1, I could see all of my different articulation notes. So this is actually an A1 that switches to a trill, and A sharp 1 -1 would be spiccato, trill's whole tone, half tone, tremolo, pizzicato. So these are all the different expressions. So you could actually just kind of come right here and you can define what MIDI controller or what key switch is actually doing that. Now, if you wanted to, you could actually define, your different remote keys here. So it's right in here where you can make the expression map setup. It's not terribly hard, but you have to it's helpful to have a list, of what the actual expression maps are in the system. So for the particular library. But again, if you check out the presets that have been done, there's a lot of different presets. So I'm seeing a question on how do we hide the new docking window. I was doing a magazine review, and the reviewer was upset that this couldn't be hidden. It's just Alt or Option T that'll hide it. If you hit Alt Control T, that'll switch between the VST instruments and the media bay. You can also hide it by going to the little setup window in the upper left-hand corner here and just clicking on the racks, so it could be hidden directly there. So if you didn't want to see it, again, just Alt or Option on the Mac T, and that will do it. And if you want to toggle the status, Alt Control or Option Control T. All right, let's go through. All right, I'm just going to circle back, look through some of the questions that people sent in. All right, so let me just reading back through comments. Is everyone learning a couple things here? Let me just go through some of the other topics that people had sent in advance, some questions. All right, so we had one question on how to have different timelines on the project. So let me just load up a particular project here. All right. So people had wanted to see kind of different ways of seeing time, because when we see Cubase here, we could have everything is based on an actual sample level. So everything is kind of at the highest possible resolution. So in Cubase, you have, you could go up to 192,000th of a second. So it's at the sample level. But how we actually determine the time could be different. So, we could look at that and divide the time and show it in different ways. For a lot of times, Cubase will default to bars and beats, where we see, measure 1, measure 2, and we see the beats in between, like beats 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, so we see our measures and our beats here in our grid. But we could also look at this in seconds. So now you can say, okay, this is 10 seconds, 30 seconds. So if you didn't necessarily have something that was tied directly to the grid, you can see it as SMPTE time code. You could also see it as samples or 60 frames per second user. But sometimes you may want to see, samples here, bars and beats here, etc. So what you could do is actually just add a ruler track. So once we add a ruler track, I could say here, I want to see bars and beats for my drums, and then for this, I wanted to add another ruler track. And at this point, I want these tracks here to be set up for time in seconds. And then we could also say here, this is going to be tied more to the video. I want to set up a ruler track and have this set for time code. So this way you could have kind of the same time just represented different ways in different parts of the project. And again, everything is just kind of a different representation of the, the core fundamental timing, which is going to be sample accurate. But that's an easy way to kind of see multiple time signature or multiple time formats at different places within the same project window. Now, someone had also emailed asking for a quick way, if there have like a time signature changes on a particular track. So let's say we go from 4/4 to 5/4 to 3/4, etc. And let's say every chorus or every bridge or every verse does that. How could we actually just simply copy those? I don't have to manually enter them in. So if I just choose to come here and we copy, then I can move my cursor here and then just right click, and then we could paste our time signatures directly there as well, so we don't have to enter it in a zillion times. Now I see a question that's kind of come up between as what's the difference between a global and a project workspace? And workspaces are really handy, and this has been really kind of improved pretty significantly in Cubase Pro 8. And you have, again, global workspaces and project workspaces. So we can think of project workspaces as being workspaces that are only applicable to that particular like .cpr, .mpr file. So only with that particular project. So let's say if I have one project, I'm doing a lot of notation work and orchestration to print out to give to real musicians. I may want to have my scoring editor set up for, in a particular way for that project, but maybe most of the time I just do strictly audio. And let's say, I start off with a template and I want this to always, my starting template, I want to hit this workspace, and I want my mixer here, my effects rack here, my VST instrument rack, laid out exactly the same way every time. That's when I would use a global workspace. So think of the project workspace as being tied directly to a particular project, and global workspaces could be used with any project. So I hope that makes it a little clear. Now we also had a question on dividing the track list. Like sometimes people are like, okay, when I do this and I scroll up and down in my project window here, maybe I want to see a particular track up top. So let's say if I'm working on a project here, and I always want kind of the lead vocal to be at the top. So what you could do is this little icon right here called Divide Track List. And what that's going to allow you to do is now as I kind of scroll, I could see that my lead vocal could disappear. And this is really subtle, and they did a great job of hiding it. But if you click right here, we can now have the Divide Track List. And if I wanted to, we could just kind of drag my lead vocal file up here. And this could be independently sized too. So if I want my lead vocal to always remain on top as I scroll down, I could just use the Divide Track List feature right there. So that way it could be a video, could be a tempo track or a marker track. As you scroll down, those tracks can always remain visible. Now if you right click, if you wanted to actually send a particular track from the bottom to the top, is you could right click and choose the toggle track list. And now as soon as you do that, that track is right there. Or again, right click on the track and click toggle track list, and that will send it back. But it's a really handy way if you always want to kind of keep your lead vocal as your reference, to be able to, always have that visible in your project. So really good for if you're doing like post-production or film scoring, so you can have the video thumbnail always visible right there. So all right, let's go back through some of our questions. I'm going to circle back, see if I missed any comments that I need to readdress. Okay. Okay, let me just go back. Is everyone learning a couple things? Hope it's finding the information useful. For me, it's I get to talk to my laptop screen, so it's a little weird. So, okay, we had some people that were wanting to do more particular kind of tuning capabilities and kind of what's kind of beyond what MIDI typically offers. Because when we work with like real string instruments or a real choral group, often what we see is their ability to strive for an actual pure temperament. So around when Bach was, composing, one of the things that was really, a problem if you listen to kind of early period music pieces was the fact that a lot of the instruments were really designed to play only in one particular or a set of particular keys in tune effectively. So a lot of the music, if you listen to a lot of early string music, is in particular keys. So like, a lot of string instruments are in flat keys, and brass instruments are generally in sharp keys, and they tend, they have kind of a legacy of being more in tune in those particular keys. So when Bach came out, one of the big things with his well-tempered clavier pieces, collection of pieces, was that there's going to be an equal temperament where there's going to be a tuning compromise, so that relatively all of the keys were in tune, but not all of them perfectly accurately, but it was kind of a design compromise, and this is what really helped propel like the keyboard as an instrument. So now you could play the keyboard in all the different keys and relatively in tune. Now some people have a particular problem with this still to this day. I can remember once I got to work with Donald Fagen, and spend a day with him, and and he was expressing to me that he didn't like Midi because it was all based on equal temperament, and he liked to be able to have to do like kind of very precise tuning so that his keyboards were set in particular tuning, tuned perfectly for different keys. So I think Bach was a Cubase user. I'm seeing kind of the quote come in, so definitely Cubase. But in particular keys, and they want those instruments to be perfectly in tune, and because equal temperament can sound really out of tune for some people. So what we did is we said, okay, if we wanted to have a way of kind of, and obviously when we deal with Midi, which is kind of has a legacy of coming from a keyboard interface, a piano keyboard interface for a lot of things. One of the things that, we deal with in Midi is it's all going to be equal temperament. And sometimes when you're trying to emulate a great real orchestra or real musicians, you realize that, the equal temperament can be off. So what I did is, and in Cubase within the project setup, so if we come directly here, we could activate the her mode tuning, and we can have different types of her mode tuning. So you can have reference, clear, pop jazz, baroque, third, fifths, adopted. And what I did is and we could set this for particular tracks. So I set the first tracks as kind of normal MIDI, and I chose just kind of wind instruments so we could actually listen to particular, without vibrato, without, reverb and stuff like that. So we could actually kind of listen to like a pure acoustic instrument sound in different temperaments. So let's go ahead and listen to equal temperament here, and we'll see that it's not really that in tune. So we'll just take a listen to it. So now let's listen to the same parts, but the tracks in her mode tuning. So now if we want to actually listen to both of them together, listen to this. So you can hear kind of what a difference having kind of an alternate, more pure temperament tuning, where it's going to actually shape the tuning of every single MIDI note, can make a big difference in how realistic the actual instruments can sound. So again, the her mode tuning can make a big difference in achieving that realism that a lot of people are seeking when trying to do like a really highly accurate mock-up. All right, so let's go ahead and I'll go back to our questions here. All right, now we had people that wanted to be able to kind of chop up different sounds. Let me just find a particular file here and be able to kind of work with the ability to have different regions automatically defined. Let's say someone is just kind of improvising different parts. Just reading some comments that are coming in here. I'm just kind of reading through some comments. Do I think that Cubase will have multiple marker tracks like Nuendo? Okay, so and also, can you see ADR in Cubase marker window? Nuendo has kind of, if you're, I'm not sure if that's a typo or if it's kind of the automatic dialogue replacement ADR stuff. And Nuendo has like real strong ADR tool set, which we could go over if you wanted to, if you want to just clarify, if you want to see that. But that's kind of one of the things that's going to distinguish Nuendo from Cubase. Okay, and we're seeing a question. Okay. I'll just go back to real quick. I'm seeing some comments back on the back onto her mode tuning. So what you need to do, sorry if this wasn't clear, is one, you could just go to the project setup. So we go to project setup. And I see Rick asking this because he's a wind player. And then you can set your her mode tuning type there. Now on the particular tracks, if you go to and it's in the inspector here. So if we go to Midi modifiers, what you need to do is to actually tell her mode tuning to follow. So this way you could actually set the her mode, set this track to follow her mode tuning and this track not to follow her mode tuning. So that's how you can set up particular tracks for her mode tuning. And it doesn't just work for kind of orchestral stuff like synthesizers, especially. You can hear kind of a big thing. And a lot of people think, oh, maybe the oscillator's drifting or it's emulating that or something like that. And it's more that you're wanting, it's actually the tuning, the equal temperament that's actually causes some instruments to not sound so good. So that's how you could do it. Sorry if I kind of missed that. So once again, go to your project setup and then just choose the her mode tuning type there, and you can experiment with some of the different types. And then under the Midi modifiers, make sure that those tracks that you want to be in her mode tuning are set to follow her mode tuning right there in the inspector. Okay, so we're seeing a question, is there a way to easily move all the audio files connected to a specific project to a different folder? Yeah, there's a really super easy way of doing that. So if let me just go to a different project here. So if I activate this project, and this is often kind of used for archival purposes. So if you wanted to, you could actually go to your file menu, and there's a little function here called backup project. So what you could actually do is actually create a new folder and hit OK. What this will actually do is it can take all the components needed to actually recreate that particular project, all the audio files, and you could actually back it up directly into a new folder, and it actually prompts you for a new folder. So let's say if you use like different loop files from different locations, and they're kind of scattered throughout your hard disk, and you go to back it up and it's like, oh, but that's a loop in this folder and it's in this directory of this subfolder. At this point, you could actually just choose to back up all the files that are used in the project. And there's some other little settings here. So let's say if you have 12 different guitar tracks, and then all of a sudden, so if you have 12 different guitar tracks and you're using 2 of those different audio files, and the 10 aren't being used, you could actually say don't back up the unused files. Or there's also an option here for minimize audio files. So if you actually want to, let's say if I had an audio file this long and I only used this much of that file and I wasn't using any of this part of that audio file in my project, if I chose to minimize the audio files, it wouldn't back that up. So just choosing the file to back up project is really just, kind of, you set the folder and then you get your different options, and then you could give it a project name, and that way you could just simply archive it directly there. So we'll just kind of, that's an easy way to kind of back up. Okay, so we'll go over the group editing functions in a couple minutes. We'll get to that, Rick, if you could just hang in there so you didn't miss it. So I had a feeling you stepped away for a minute or two. So, all right, so seeing questions, how to insert audio effects into my project. Am I missing something? From Chuck from Magnolia, Texas. So one of the things that you could do is actually, if you, I'm just going to reread it. Okay, so how do you insert audio effects? So if you just select the particular audio files, there's a couple different ways of adding effects onto a particular track. If you want it to be dedicated to a particular track, you can add it as an insert effect. So, if I look at my track, and I could actually just open up my edit view here. At this point, I could say, okay, let's just add an insert effect. So if I say, okay, let's add, and a lot of times inserts would be maybe like dynamics and EQs. So say if I wanted to have, multi-band envelope shaper, and then you could just kind of, once you come here, let's say if I don't delete it accidentally, so say I just kind of pop here. And at that point, you could double click and you could see your effect. So that effect as an insert is dedicated directly only to that particular track. Now, some effects you may want to share across multiple tracks, and that's often what we would use a send effect for. So if I right click, we could actually choose to add a track, and let's say we wanted to add a delay, and I wanted multiple tracks to be using that same delay but in varying amounts. At this point, I could choose to just say, okay, let's say I wanted to add my mono delay, and we want a stereo delay. So this is going to add an effects channel track all the way at the bottom. And this, in fact, will allow you to see your delay here. But if I wanted to come here to my guitar, I could go to my sends. And one quick tip that a lot of people don't know is if you hold down a control key, you could have multiple parameters, where you can see your inserts and sends simultaneously. So if I say, okay, I just want to have a compressor here on that guitar track, but I wanted to add this delay, I could just click right here, and then I could say, let's add that mono delay. And then I could send this amount, and this is our kind of wet-dry ratio. So the farther to the left, the drier this signal is, and if the farther over to the right, the wetter that signal, or more of that effect is being blended in. Now, generally, when you want to use it as an effects, and you may want to adjust your mix all the way to 100% on the actual effect plugin, and then at that point, you could just adjust that way. So that's a good handy trick. But if you wanted to use a delay just as a particular file, as an insert on one particular track, at that point you may want to adjust like the mix percentage directly there. So that could be helpful. Now in Cubase Pro, in the higher versions of Cubase, you could also just kind of select a range, and now you could just say, okay, I want to go to my plugins. At this point, you could say, okay, I just wanted to go to my default plugins, and I just wanted to add, let's say, an EQ, a graphic EQ, let's say, just in that range selection. So now when I process, it's going to take just that selected range of audio, and at that point, just process that effect. Now that's kind of changing that effect, and it'll always kind of be there. But one of the great things is, even after you've saved the project in Cubase, you can come right over here, and let's say if I did a number of edits, you can go to your offline process history, and even after saving the project, you could just say, oh, if I did like 6 edits, I could take edit number 3 out and leave edits 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6. Or I could, even after saving, just remove or replace this effect with a different effect if I wanted to. So I could just say, okay, let's just replace that particular effect, and then, or if I wanted to just remove that plugin, I could just simply remove that plugin. So you can treat your effect plugins as inserts dedicated to a particular track. You could kind of do it region based by the offline process history mode, or using the effect sends. So those are kind of easy ways of being able to add audio effects onto your system. So I'm just seeing, how do I get Cubase Windows to reckon? I'm seeing just a question from Daddy-O Man 1933. How do I get Cubase Windows to recognize my new Line 6 mobile 49 keys keyboard controller? So once you have your any MIDI device connected in Cubase, you may have to install a driver. And sometimes MIDI keyboards that are often USB and have kind of, let's say, a 5-pin DIN MIDI connection. You may have to switch whether it's where the MIDI is being transmitted from, whether it's a USB connection or the 5-pin DIN. So you may have to do that. But once you do that, you should see it once you go to your device setup under your MIDI port setup. So once if you have everything installed, you should see your interface listed here. So you may have to install it if it's not a class compliant. You may have to install a driver for it to be seen. So once you do that, you could it should be visible, and then any MIDI controller will work with Cubase. But you may just have to make sure that what method of MIDI transmission, is it USB or 5-pin DIN, or is it actually just using the actual USB cable? And then make sure that you actually connect it before Cubase starts, because it scans all the MIDI devices in your system. So if you connect it after Cubase starts, it's not going to see it. So make sure it's connected before, and then you should be all set with having your Line 6 USB controller working. I see a question. Speaking of the processing effects, what happened to the offline effects chain? Nuendo has the ability of, if you have a number of offline processes, to be saved as a batch process. And then, but Cubase has never had that feature, but so you could have to kind of do it manually for that. So I'm seeing a question. I'm just kind of going through some of the questions. If we could save the input connections to the audio track presets. Let me just try it real quick here. I'll try a new project. We'll try this for Rick here. we'll go ahead and add some audio tracks. Okay, then I'm going to go to my VST connections. I'll add some fake inputs here. So let's say let me just... And if you come here, if you just click on Add Bus, you can actually choose multiple. All right, so let's say I have now 10 inputs. And let's say, and this is a really handy trick, if you wanted to, so say if you have all of your inputs here, and we have all of our tracks, you can go to the routing, and at this point, you know, I could do this kind of one by one, which kind of is silly. Now, if I wanted all these to be routed to the same area, if you hold down Alt or Option plus Shift, you could say, okay, I want these all to go out of my right output. I could assign them to the same destination. So at this point, if I say, let's take these all to the left output, holding down Alt plus Shift, which turns on our quick link mode, that would enable us to route to multiple destinations. So let's say my stereo, but if I just hold down Shift, and this may seem just a little counterintuitive from other computer operations, this will allow you to ripple. So now when I hold down Shift, we see mono in 2, mono in 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, etc. So that way it automatically sequentially assigned those. Okay, so let me just, all right, so we're going to try this for Rick, and let's save this as a track preset, and we'll call it Depofy. All right. All right, so I'll go ahead and remove those tracks, and let me just now, it didn't look like it saved the inputs, so I'll pass that on to see if we can get the inputs saved with that. That's a good point. So, but using kind of some of the keyboard modifiers, that should make it a little less painful. Okay. All right. So let's take a quick look. One of the questions that we had mailed in, sorry, I just got sidetracked here. Let me just, is setting up regions. So if you double click, you could launch the sample editor. And this is like really handy, like if you're doing like, you know, a lot of times perhaps like interview questions, you know, stuff like that, where, you know, you could come right over here and you'll see this little show regions sign. So if I have this kind of enabled, you know, let me just put it here. And let's say I know that this is an interview topic or question, or I really like this part of the guitar solo. So I'll enable regions, and then I could just click on, I select that range, and then I could click on the plus sign here and say, okay, that was another cool improv part. Someone's playing like a really just making up cool vocals, and you could type in a name for each of the regions and say, okay, let's just take this. And now, okay, let's give it a name. So you could define particular sections of a song. And we see this like for people, you know, like, you know, on Monday, do this. And, you know, defining regions for like news broadcasting, radio station edits, etc. So you can have kind of all your different regions defined here. Now, when you go to look at the pool, and we can think of the pool as being kind of the audio frame kind of the audio, all the audio files that are used for this particular project. So now if I wanted to, again, go to my pool, so just go to my media menu, and now if I wanted to turn each of these, and we can see kind of how these regions are a region of the actual longer audio file. But if I wanted to turn these into discrete, separate audio files, I could select that. And then at this point, I could say, just right click, and under audio, you could just choose bounce selection. It'll ask you to choose the audio files. And now it's created actual separate, distinct audio files based on the naming conventions that you've used from the region. So your regions is still defined, but now you could have actual separate, distinct audio files. So for a lot of like sample editing tasks, like, okay, I want to do drum samples, it's very, very fast and easy for just kind of having like one audio rolling through, and then just be able to afterwards, go back and, capture different sound design elements or different drum samples, guitars, bass samples, stuff like that. So, all right, now Rick had a question regarding using the track versions, I believe he was doing. So, and he was getting a message saying, so let me just fire this up here real quick. Okay, so we saw a little bit with track versions. So one of the things that's really helpful when kind of working with track versions is you may want to deal with stuff in groups and group editing. So when I want to come here, if I want to select a number of different tracks, I could right click and say move selected tracks to new folder. Okay, and that's really handy because now you could actually have a folder for like all your different drum tracks if you wanted. And now you see this little option here called group editing. So now as I record, and sometimes it's helpful to do this before you start tracking. Because if you have recordings that, if I just kind of have recordings and they're different lengths and you try to treat them as a group, you may get the message saying that they're unequal lengths. And I think this is the message that Rick had run into. So maybe before doing that, before recording, we want to kind of set our group editing on. Now, I'm just going to open up and one of the things I've done is set up, and this will actually go to another question as well. I've set up my groove agent here to where we could say, I want to take this, and I've routed these to individual outs. So I can go to pad 4. This is on output 4. Groove agent has 16 outputs. And as I kind of click on the pads, you can see the output here sequentially increase. So I've routed these to different outputs. And now when I go to my VST connections, if I wanted to route these, I could come here and just say we're just going to take these, and there's two different ways. One is I could assign kind of a fake bus if I wanted to, like a fake output bus, and I could do that, or I could make groups. I've made 16 groups, and these groups aren't really assigned anywhere. So what's kind of key with this is now if I wanted to take this and record, what I've done is for these audio tracks, I've set their input to come from group 1 through 16. So we had people that were wondering, like, okay, if I have a bunch of drum tracks and I wanted to print them all as audio, So what you could do is take the individual outputs, and I know it's a bit of a circuitous route, and then route those outputs to a group, or route it to these outputs to a bus, like a physical output, and then take that output bus or that group as inputs. And what this will allow you to do is to, as I wanted to play a pattern here, I could now take this track and place all these into record. So now that I have it in a folder, I could just click record, and I could get my 16 discrete channels. So let's say if I wanted to take that and maybe, like, let's say I didn't set my punch in, I could now go to like a new version here. So and then what I could do is a couple of different ways. So if we actually just go to track versions, and we could think of this as having kind of parallel versions, I could say let's just do a new version, and I could now just click on a different pattern. And once I have this pattern, let's say I'll just place this into record. All right, and let's say I want to do a third pattern here, and I could just hit Control-Shift-N for new pattern. So that's another method of doing it. So now we'll play this pattern, and let's say we'll place this into record. Now I'm not setting kind of a punch out point. I'm trying to maybe kind of recreate Rick's scenario here. All right, and let's do one more pattern here. And we could do this from our project menu and just choose to do under track versions, a new version right there. So let's say we'll play this. So this is basically just generating audio here. All right, now if I wanted to switch between these different track versions, now I can so they're basically parallel tracks. I can do this with Midi tracks or directly with audio or tempo tracks, as you saw, time signature tracks. Now, if I turn my group editing off, I can say I wanted the kick to come from version 1 or from version 3. And I wanted this hi-hat open to come from version 3. So one thing to be aware of now, if I wanted to just kind of come here, let's say I want to duplicate this version. If I wanted like one measure of each of the different takes, I'm going to activate my group editing. What the group editing is going to allow you to do, and we see this message here, and this is why I kind of recreated this, is we see this little message saying the tracks may not be in sync because they're different lengths. A lot of times you can just kind of choose to ignore that, especially if it's kind of, you know, out of your usable area. But that's kind of why. It's because there's different lengths that have been recorded. So make sure, like a lot of times when I do this, kind of go through this process, I just kind of set a punch out point. But most of the time it just kind of, it'll work fine. So let's say if I select all of my tracks and I have this selected, now we have our group editing enabled. I'm going to duplicate this version here. And what I want to do is simply select the range, and since my group editing is enabled, all of those tracks within the folder, within the group that have been kind of selected to be locked, I can now take version 2, and I'm just going to copy, and we'll say this is going to be our comp, paste. And let's select the next bar from the next version, and I'll just copy. I was doing the keyboard shortcut before, but nope. Let me undo that, and I'll just say we're going to copy that. And now we come right here, paste. And now let's take the last bar, copy, paste. So now if I did this right, we'll have kind of the first take followed by the second take. So, you're pretty much going to be fine, but sometimes, if it's the more critical thing is if the beginning is off versus the ending off. So, but a lot of times, if you're seeing it visually, you should be fine. So a lot of times I don't necessarily worry about that message. It's just kind of giving you a heads up that, your default editing mode could be a little off because the lengths are different. So I hope that helps, Rick. Let me go through. But that's a great way of kind of having parallel tracks. And a lot of times I may do comping. You use the comping tool for a single track, but for multiple tracks, like if I'm doing a band and they're just kind of, okay, let's do take 2, let's try take 3, I'll just kind of use track versions and find that works really well. And so kind of a great paradigm. Now, if you wanted to switch back and forth between lanes, our traditional lane view, and our track versions, what you could do is just go to the project menu, and you can kind of just toggle back and forth between these. So we could say, let's create lanes from the versions. And now when I come here, I could open up the lanes, and I can see each of those different lanes selected. Or conversely, you could take lanes to track versions to lanes, etc. So you could kind of go back and forth because we don't want to necessarily introduce a new paradigm and kill the older paradigm. So I hope that makes sense. I see a question from Joey. What's the difference between a global copy and a regular copy? A global copy would include elements such as like your tempo track and time signature track. So it would be kind of the entire layer as opposed to just kind of the individual part. So with a global copy, you could have all of the tempo track and different time signatures included, kind of at, the underlying elements, kind of, other than the actual MIDI or audio tracks. So how do I get my own audio tracks into Loop Mash is a question that's just come up. All right, so we'll go ahead and open up Loop Mash. All right, so Loop Mash is a really slick tool for being able to take different loops and kind of mash them together in really interesting ways. Kind of like we see a lot of YouTube videos of different songs being mashed together and come up with kind of an interesting result. But one of the great things with Loop Mash is you could just drag and drop. And once you just do this, it's going to do an analysis of your different files. So all you have to do is literally just kind of drag and drop from the project window or directly from Media Bay. So you say, okay, I like this, and let me find a drum beat here. And that's all you have to do to kind of incorporate your own audio track. So it could be from Media Bay, or it could be, from any project window. So, if I wanted to switch to a different file, I could, even without having that project activated, I could just drag and drop like that as well. So all you have to do is just literally kind of just drag and drop directly right into Loop Mash from your project window, and then you could kind of do all sorts of great kind of manipulation of your audio in really interesting and exciting ways. All right. Yeah, so Loop Mash comes directly in Cubase as well. So, all right, let me go back to my list of questions, and I'm going to just circle back and see if I'm missing any other points or if I need to clarify any stuff. And if I've kind of missed your point, if you entered it in the comments field, just please feel free to re-enter it. We'll try to go back. All right, so we had some questions on how to kind of do like global transpositions. So if we wanted to, and one of the cool things is there's actually a lot of people aren't as hip to this on wanting to maybe if you want to try a different key. So let me just go to one project here real quick. So I see a question of, is it possible to make your own drum patterns in Groove Agent and have it respond dynamically like the factory presets? I think that's kind of just done with the with the acoustic agent, and it's kind of part of the programming. So I don't know a way that the users can do it, but it's obviously one of the features. So you get to have like multiple levels of dynamics and complexity as well, but I don't, and since the actual content is, kind of set up that way, and you're not, while you can make your own kits in the beat agent very quickly, the acoustic agent's more kind of set up to be set up, where it's kind of fixed to the factory content. So I don't know of a way of doing that if that's what you're kind of talking about. Okay. So I'll show this transposition track, and then I see our question from Ace here. So if I have a track here, let's say if I'm kind of playing along. What did you say? Let's say we have Midi and some audio going on, kind of big production. And what I can do now is just add a transpose track. And this isn't really, as it's kind of an underutilized feature. So if I'm just gonna come right over here, and we'll just say as we're playing along. You wished it all away, and I'm left here for 1,000 years. So now I'm just gonna double click here, and we'll say go down -2. Just a horrible modulation there, but so you can just kind of try out different keys if you wanted to see what it's like, if this works. So I'm going to go up. So I could obviously kind of work out better transitions with that, but you get an idea how easy it is to kind of use the transpose functionality with that. Okay, so I'm seeing how did I copy and paste the bar without from Ace? Maybe I just want to make sure I understand this, but I think if we just kind of use the range selection tool, copy, Hey, so I'm not sure what I did that kind of triggered that question, but it could be. I'm not sure if it was back in the back on the track versions or not. But maybe if you could ask the question again, I'm not quite understanding. Maybe I'm just having a brain cramp. But all right, so we'll take a quick look. I'm just going to circle back. So I think with about loop mash. So I think loop mash. I know it's in the full version. I think it's even in the artist or the. I'm not sure if it's in the elements version, but you could check online. But it's a really cool plugin. All right, let me go back to our list of questions here. All right, so one last question I had is the last one on my list that I had. And again, if you guys have particular questions, please feel free to enter them in. And Ace, if you want to maybe reiterate that question, I'm just maybe being a little dense and not understanding. But so we had a question on setting up like a Q mix. For people, we had two more questions that got asked. So if we wanted to set up like an add reverb in a Q mix without having that reverb on the actual file, like in the mix, like we're giving the singer courtesy reverb, we can now come over here. Let me just open up a different project. So Mark Davenport had a question. If you transpose a project making use of sample libraries that use key switches for articulation changes, does that affect the key switches too? If they're set up as expression maps, no. But if you're using kind of the traditional key switches, what you could actually do is just set up a logical editor preset of, you could say transpose all notes except for this particular range of key switches, so you could do that as well. But so it's one of the cool things with using an expression map, that it kind of decouples it from the actual MIDI note. So that's kind of a cool thing, but otherwise it would affect the key switches. So you could play around with that as well. All right, so if we wanted to have different headphone or Q mixes for people, it's a really handy thing to do when you're tracking a live band where you want it to have each of the musicians have their own headphone mix. So let's say if I kind of play this project, get an idea here. So let's say I have, bass, drums, guitar, vocal. Now, we can set up your Q mixes, and we could actually just kind of go to your racks and make sure your Qs are available here. And if you wanted to select all of the tracks, and we can kind of just zoom in here a little bit. Got a lot of tracks in this project. All right. So what you could do is I'm going to select all these tracks, and then I'm just going to activate my quick link. And then right-click in the control room, and you'll see this all cues. So I want this to be, I want to use the current, I want to first activate all the cues. So this will turn them all on. And then I could say, let's use the current mix levels. And this is going to basically take our actual mix that we have here and embed and apply that. And I could also use the current pan settings. All right, so now if I wanted to set up my Q mix so that everyone gets the more me headphone mix, when we look at this, I have this kind of labeled as, you know, vocal. This is my vocal mix, so this sends this track more into my vocals, this slider more into the guitars, more into the bass, more into the drums. So if I want to come here and take all of my drums, I can now route that out directly to the drums. And I could go to my bass, route the bass to the bass, etc. And let's take our guitar parts here. And send more of those to the guitar. So now, when I listen to these, I could actually switch between my different Q mixes here. So I want to listen to the drummer's Q mix, the bass players, or the guitar player's Q mix. So now the question was, how do we get effects on those? So now what you could do is just kind of come right over here. If you select the, let's say, our drums, and then if you click on setup, here you could have up to 8 insert effects. So I'm just going to add like just a little bit of reverb here. So let's just add a little revelation. And then I may want to just kind of adjust my mix here. So at that point, you could add different effects for the different Q mixes independently there. So, all right. All right. Let me go through some of our questions. So I see in the control room, is there any way to use 2 sets of monitors at the same time, like in the studio and the vocal booth? What you could do is just kind of come over here and define a preset. Or what you could do, let's say if you're in a vocal booth, think of an interesting way. So if they're in, let me just reread the question, make sure I get it right. Let me just see if come here and so if you have the, let's say if you have your mix set up here, so you want this, I'm just rereading it. You want to use 2 sets of monitors at the same time, like in the studio and in the vocal booth. So let's say this is the vocal booth here. All you have to do is, instead of checking it on Q right here, if you put it to mix, this will just take the control room mix and route it directly out there. So that way you could actually feed, so that way you could kind of feed the same signal, or you could have an independent Q mix. But if you just click right here in the mix, this will take that, your control room mix, and feed it out to the vocal booth or to the guitar booth, as opposed to their individual effects. So. All right, so okay, I'm seeing some clarification. Yeah, that's a good point, Joey. That sometimes singers want to hear with speakers, and sometimes they love to hold an SM58 and sing. And I've seen a lot of sessions where the singer is held at 58, and they've been recorded with a completely different mic, but they're very comfortable kind of holding a 58, especially they do a lot of live work. Okay, I see Jim Worth, alias or Alice Jim Worth leaving. I'm glad you had a good time. Yeah. So yeah, but yeah, you could have both those speakers kind of set on at the same time, and do it just like that. Okay. Okay, so I'm seeing a question from James on that. So let me just go back to Ace's question real quick. Let me. So I think I'm just going to reread that, and then we'll go into the James's question about the MIDI modifier keys. Just scroll up a little bit here. Okay, so I think what you could do, Ace, is if you just kind of come here, let's say if you wanted to just kind of select a range, and if you have this, there's a couple different ways to do this. Like if you have markers, one of the great things is if you want to select a range. Let's see if that's so. I'm going to select that range, and then if we go to, let's say, if I wanted to repeat that range, which I think is what you want to do without having to cut, copy, paste, is kind of when you go to the edit and go to the range functions, and here, you could do stuff like, okay, I want to, if you wanted to delete time, you could do that, but you could also, let's say if I used the range tool here, I think since I have that selected, and if I go to you could do like a kind of insert silence, but I think what you want to do is maybe let me just revert this really quick. See if I can remember how to do this real quick. I think we can maybe do it with the range. Yeah, let me see if I can just find a simpler part here real quick. Hang on. It might be, let me try this project. Then we'll go into some of the MIDI editing. Okay, so let me just select range here. Let me just see if I can. I'm just kind of blanking on how to do it. Sorry, I'm having a brain cramp on that. Maybe I'll come back to it. So sorry about that. All right, so let me, we had a question on using some of the Midi modifiers. So let's go take a quick look at that. Just get this project loaded up. Okay, so there's a couple cool MIDI modifiers that you can use within the key editor that are really handy. So constraining direction of, let's say, edits. So if I have a bunch of notes here and let's say I just wanted to move them, if you hold down the Alt key, we can make a copy. So if I move it up visually here, say my selected notes. So if I just I could move it freely like that. If I hold down the Alt key, I can make a copy, but I may want to kind of constrain the direction. So if I select the notes and move it vertically first, hold down my Alt key, and then you can see I can move it freely. Then if I hold down my Control key, now I can't shift it in time. So it's going to be constrained. So so as I work with that, we can just say, I want to select these notes, move it vertically, hold down the Alt key, then while holding down the Alt key, press the Control key. And now I can't move it in time. Or conversely, if I have chosen to move the time and now hold down the Alt key, I can't change the pitch. So it really depends on which direction that you actually work with. Now, a lot of the other tools will have kind of, extra powers as well. So if you wanted to come here, let's say, you could delete notes. But if you wanted to delete, let's say, every note after this note, you could hold down like the Alt key, and that will erase every note after that. So, a lot of the tools will kind of get extra powers. So if you wanted to grab the line tool, you could also just kind of add notes. But if you grab the scissors tool, if you wanted to split notes, you could just kind of come right over here and or with the line tool, and we just grab the line tool here with the Alt key. And so a lot of the tools will have kind of alternate powers, but kind of for the constraining direction on the copies, Alt and Control, depending on where you initially, what direction you initially moved it in. That'll do the trick for you. All right, so we had one last question on guitar, stereo guitar sound, example chorus on one track using plugins or amp rack. I have to record mono, then copy, then pan, hard left, hard right. I don't always get results using Lambda lexicon. So a lot of times, if you're using the effects, you may want to, like, if you're using chorusing and stuff like that. So those plugins, if you're using them as inserts are going to retain the channel width of your of the track. So if you have a mono guitar part and you run a chorusing, like a stereo chorusing as an insert, since it's a mono guitar part, you put the insert on, it's going to follow the channel width and be mono. So you may want to use an effect send for the chorusing, and that way your mono guitar track can still be run through the stereo effects. So definitely kind of give that a try, and I think that'll do the trick for you. All right, so we've gone about 2 hours and 20 minutes. I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it up. I have to go home and see my family before everyone goes to bed. And again, if you kind of like this, let other people know. If you have questions, please feel free to kind of leave comments on the channel. Please feel free to subscribe to this channel and to the Steinberg YouTube channel. I hope everyone has kind of learned something tonight. I learned a couple tips and tricks. We'll always kind of be here to show new stuff. If you want to have feature sets clarified so you're kind of getting the most out of your Cubase software. I'd like to thank everyone for really participating. It's been kind of a great turnout. If you liked the this format, let me know. If there's something you hated, let me know. We just want to make it better for you guys so that everyone's kind of getting something out of it. Let your friends know. Subscribe to the channel. Make comments if you like it or dislike it. Just kind of let me know. We want to make this a real great experience for you guys, that we can't be everywhere all the time. We're going to be doing some in June. We'll be in New York City this Thursday, June 4th. We'll be in Texas, in Dallas, Austin, and Houston on the 15th, 16th, and 17th. So you could check kind of some of the schedules at steinberg.net/Club Cubase. But anything that you want covered, please let us know. We want to make sure you're getting the most out of your software. So thank you. Have a great night, and we'll see you next month. Everyone enjoy their summer.